Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now today I want to explore the topic of data security in this age of remote work, hybrid work, cloud-hosted applications, all in a backdrop of market volatility. And my search for a suitable guest led me to a company called Polymer, which is a no-code data loss prevention platform that is allowing companies to monitor, auto-remediate and apply behavioural techniques to reduce the risk of insider threats, sensitive data misuse, and even leakage over third-party SaaS systems. Now, as data loss prevention is no longer a technical problem, but a business risk, especially in the world of remote hybrid work environments, I'm quite excited to dive a little bit deeper in this topic today. So buckle up and hold on tight, because today, wherever you're listening, I'm going to beam your ears all the way to New York, where the founder and CEO of Polymer is waiting to speak with us today. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yes, Yasser Ali here, founder of Polymer. It's a cybersecurity startup focused on data security over SaaS platforms.
And I'd love to take you back in time for a moment before we learn more about Polymer. So can you remember where your passion for tech came from, or just the moment that put you on this path that you're on today?
I think it was Commodore 64, to be honest. The video games I played on, back in the day. Right around that time, I was exposed to Atari, the Pong game. Yeah. A few years prior to that, I grew up in Pakistan, so everything kind of came a little bit later there. But video games was one thing which we were exposed to quite on a real-time basis.
And you know, after nearly 2,100 interviews on here, I always ask that question, so I'm always fascinated what put people on their path. And the amount of people that have said that Commodore 64 machine. And I remember wanting one as a kid. I remember my mum and dad to begin with saying, it's just games, you're not going to learn anything on there. But of course, we all picked up books and were copying code out of them, etc. It was a real rites of passage, wasn't it?
It truly was, and I heard from my uncle, aunts, and my parents, you're not going to learn anything from this thing anyway. So yes, I think everyone has gone through the same path.
And of course, your path led you to Polymer. So can you tell me the story behind the company and also the problems that you set out to solve with technology there?
Yeah, essentially the path started off. I used to be on Wall Street as a developer. Once upon a time after college, I was a computer science major and went on the dark side of more finance for a bit, almost a decade. And then I was running a consulting business focused on data, IT, and architecture, where I was solving problems for Wall Street firms, and saw a set of problems having a very common overlapping issue of the human errors in data protection. And no amount of controls, no amount of data governance programs, millions of budgets I've seen gone to waste just because it did not address that human risk component of data security or data governance. And that's kind of where the genesis of Polymer came from. And about 2 or change years ago, right around COVID, is when I decided to take the plunge, stop the consulting business, and went all in with this company.
And I'm conscious there will be people listening hearing about Polymer for the very first time. And it is, of course, a no-code data loss prevention platform, DLP, that allows companies to monitor, auto-remediate and apply behavioural techniques to ultimately reduce the risk from things like insider threats, sensitive data misuse, leakage, and especially over third-party SaaS platforms, etc. But can you just set the scene a little and tell me a little bit more about who your customers are and how you're helping them?
Sure. So this is kind of the backdrop of this is this huge migration going on over cloud applications. You and I are using Microsoft 365 now, for example. You don't get the desks anymore. We are more and more using Gmail. Hotmail used to be the old one. And the fact is, these platforms are built for high collaboration. It should be easy for me to dump my file in Google Drive and create a link and share it with someone externally, or download a file, attach it to my email, and send it over to 100 of my buddies out there, which is awesome. It removes friction in terms of doing your business as an employee. However, this allows employees and workers in an organization to then share sensitive data around their customers, around the patients, or secrets of the company, either storing it at home on their private personal devices, using unsecure Wi-Fi's, or sharing it with external contractors they should not be sharing it with, for example. So there is a lot of porous endpoints which have erupted as the adoption of SaaS platforms and cloud-hosted applications has increased. You can no longer stop traffic at a firewall level. Firewall is now something which is very virtual, no pun intended. And the organizations have no visibility in how their employees are using these SaaS platforms. I don't know, within my workforce is downloading customer data, transaction information sets, PHI, PII data related to GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, and which can have a direct monetary as well as regulatory consequences for my business. Or frankly, even if I'm a small business, I don't want my employees walking away with my data or sharing it with someone they should not be sharing it with. So there's no guardrails by default present in these systems, in these SaaS platforms in general. And that is kind of where Polymer comes in, where we can connect literally with a click behind the scenes into these applications, SaaS applications like Google Drive, Slack, Teams, OneDrive, GitHub, Bitbucket, and so on and so forth. And we can monitor what your employees are doing. We can stop things from actually like leaking in some cases. But at the core of this is the idea that we can flag the employees themselves that, hey, you're being watched, and this is something you're doing, which if you're sharing a file which has sensitive data, it violates the company data governance policies, and you should not be doing that. So essentially, that's kind of where we come in. The product comes in. It's kind of your virtual compliance officer. We used to call it VCO once upon a time. It's to prevent data exfiltration from your organization's SaaS platforms.
When I was researching you guys, I quickly learned how you're focusing on SaaS platform data security, because that is the dark web of sorts for organizations where data controls just generally don't exist. Can you expand on that and the scale of the problem there?
Yeah, no, dark web is a very apt description. Dark web typically relates to that alternative internet where hackers are trading tokens and stolen records, and it's something which is kind of most people have no visibility into, majority of the public. And dark web for organizations, it ends up becoming these SaaS platforms. If I share a link on my file externally with someone and they share it with someone else after that, your data can be like 5 levels out outside of your organization, with you having no control what people are doing with that. And that's kind of where things come in, because you don't have visibility into how people are using your company's information, your company's data, your employees, your contractors, your partners. And that's kind of where we want to take back control for organizations to be able to restrict reckless pilfering and exfiltration of this information and these files and documents.
And I often talk on this podcast about binary thinking. And I think often in InfoSec, teams view security as a 0 or a 1 problem of either I am secured, check the box, or I'm not. And what fascinates me about your story is, as an ex-Wall Street bond trader, can you tell me more about how it has made you look at risk on probably a more probabilistic gradient?
Yeah, sure. I was at Bear Stearns. I was at a bunch of hedge funds. I was at Barclays Prop Desk. Was trading subprime mortgages into the financial crisis, where we were on some of the positions we were sitting on. We were hedged. We had exposure to risky mortgage borrowers, and we were hedged with other risky mortgage borrowers from our bond positions or some other types of hedges we had. Reality is there's no such thing as a perfect hedge. If the market moves, if you are hedged, let's say you have a position on IBM and you want to basically hedge it against Microsoft. So if the technology sector goes down, then both Microsoft and IBM should go down. If you like IBM more than Microsoft as a company, IBM stock price should go down less than the Microsoft stock price. So you should come out okay on your position overall. But in reality, it does not work that way. Markets are very messy. There is a lot of uncertainty in terms of how information in the market gets absorbed. And your positions can behave erratically. And in some cases, the 10-year events or the generational events like a great financial crisis do happen. So similar thing for InfoSec is very pertinent, where when InfoSec leaders look at controls, my firewalls, my MSSP watching my activity from external threat actors, you think that you're kind of like, okay, I have this control, I'm good. But in terms of reality is that there is degrees of protection, and people in the information security field is what I have got exposed to in past few years. Do not think of it from a probabilistic perspective. There's no such thing as being secure or not secure. There's always going to be blind spots. How do you calculate that uncertainty gradient? How do you calculate the unknown unknowns in my book or in my infrastructure or in my InfoSec defense posture? And that's kind of where we are taking another look in terms of from a data protection angle. How do we demonstrate value to the customer? Like I cannot tell you with an honest face that I'm protecting 100% of a risk because there could be some ways your employees can still steal data. They can take a picture on their phone. I can't stop that. They can WhatsApp a message of that picture to someone else and your data, your customer information is gone. I cannot protect against that. But I could tell you that from the more common methods of data exfiltration, that this is kind of what we're protecting, and this is the overall risk profile. And if we then, most of these risk angles, the biggest exposure from this is from the human risk. And that's kind of where what we have noticed is past behavior is a good predictor for future behavior also. And being able to risk profile and assess the human risk of your employees based on how they interact with these SaaS platforms. Are they the ones who are always doing a public share versus sharing a restricted link, for example? It's a common method of sharing files on online file storage systems. Or are these the people who are sending a message to everyone in a channel, in a chat channel, saying, hey, look at this file, can you elaborate on this? So we have seen that by highlighting this behavior and be able to take actions on that behavior to train or nudge these users into not doing these risky practices in future, we have been able to reduce the risk at organizations by quite a large amount. And that's kind of where this probabilistic risk-based approach is something which is very important in InfoSec, and be able to quantify some of these on metrics that can give a true picture rather than saying we're secure or not secure.
And you mentioned human risk there. And of course, for as long as I can remember, it's always been employees are the biggest cybersecurity risk. That's the kind of narrative that we've been given. And on that side of things, can you tell me more about how by actually deploying mitigating controls and nudging the workforce to behave more responsibly, businesses can actually make an organization's information security posture much more resilient?
So 90+% of all the breaches happen because of a human error, either by mistake or malicious. So keeping that in viewpoint, if you are able to train your employees into better data hygiene or better security posture, you can eliminate a very, very large amount of your information security risk or just your cybersecurity risk in general. Organizations typically will use phishing email practices to at least train users in not clicking on links from unknown sources coming in through the firewall into the inboxes. There are other ways where employees can be putting the company at risk in terms of how they use SaaS platforms, for example. So being able to apply behavioral science techniques, I almost went to LSE behavioral science program for a year, actually. So I'm an amateur expert, so to speak, of after reading like almost 24 books on the behavioral science approaches. But what we noticed is nudging and being able to train at the moment the violation happens, the training moments which come up when an employee does do something which is unsecure or not the best practice. We have seen that the probability of that employee doing the same thing again reduces by 50% the first time you do it. And that lasts for at least 4 weeks or longer. So we have seen that right amount of nudges, right amount of stick and carrots in terms of how they are using the systems they are using on a day-to-day basis. If we can integrate, provide some feedback loops within the environments they're using. For example, if you share a file in Google Drive, can I get a notification right away that, hey, there's some sensitive data you're sharing with someone else? Are you sure you want to do this? Yeah, maybe I'm sure I take the risk, or maybe I should not be doing this. I'm going to remove the link, for example, so on and so forth. So there are a variety of ways where we can be applying the right amount of pressure without pissing off the employee or creating an operational friction, where we have seen these approaches work quite successfully on the ground.
And as someone working right in the heart of this space, especially as it's continuously evolving, are there any particular tech trends that you're monitoring closely right now? Is there anything that excites you?
One of the most dangerous things which is going on in InfoSec space is recently we saw this news around phishing and threat actors attacking the SaaS platform directly. So that's in Google Drive, for example, people sending in links to Google Drive files, and when you click on that file, it literally downloads a virus onto your computer. So there is a bunch of these events or trends going on within the cybersecurity space, which are quietly kind of making their way up in the news, but they are quite dangerous in terms of how the threat actors are going beyond just email now to go after the employees. And so as part of that, the social engineering aspect of things is becoming a very big thing in terms of I troll an employee, I go after the employee with an email with a threat saying, I know you live here, I know you do this, you need to give me, you need to install this program on your device, otherwise I'll do X to you, for example. So we've seen those social engineering attacks gaining momentum in the recent past, because that is kind of the best way to get inside organizations. And the other related aspect to that is insider threats for employees, either malicious for either being threatened externally. They are forced to do some actions that they don't want to, or they're being paid to do something inside the organization. So inside threat is it's not technical, but it's a big piece of how tech and human psychology are coming together to create some very, very high amount of risk for large enterprises. That's another space which I'm looking at. But outside of cybersecurity, though, the biggest tech trend I'm looking at is in terms of longevity. How can technology help with longevity? So I can do another whole podcast of that, but let's leave it at that for now.
Well, we'll have to get you back on. But before I do let you go, what's next for Polymer? I appreciate there's probably not too much you can share, but are there any teasers you can leave us with on what we can expect?
Yeah, there is a lot coming out, a lot of features. We are expanding upon predictive modeling in terms of being able to predict future kind of risks arising at organizations. And the one area which we are slowly revealing to the public has been around suspicious activity alerts in terms of employees acting weird or out of norm. Can we catch that at the bud and be able to kind of highlight the risk and reduce that risk? So, but having said that, though, we are constantly putting stuff out in terms of our updates on the product and what we're kind of thinking through about how we are approaching these issues.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the podcast and joining me today. But before I let you go, I always like to finish the show by asking the guests to leave everyone listening with a personal note of inspiration as a gift. So I'm going to ask you now, is there a book that has inspired you or important to you, or something that you've read that you think would be really useful for anybody listening that we can add to our Amazon wish list? Is there anything that you'd leave us with today?
One of the recent books which had a big impact was Courage to be Disliked. The book is a kind of a continuation or a rephrasing of core Buddhist philosophies around events which happen and how we perceive them and how it affects our mood and how that affects how we react. What the reality the book teaches you is events will be happening and how you react to them is up to you. So on a given day, for example, there could be ups and downs in my life as an entrepreneur, and you would take things very seriously like I used to. But what I realized over time is, especially after reading this book, that things outside your control are not in your control, so they should not be affecting your mood and how you go about your day-to-day.
Love that. I'll get that added to our Amazon wish list. And finally, before I let you go, for anyone listening just wanting to find out more information about anything we talked about today, what's the best starting point for all things Polymer and the best way to contact your team if anyone wants to carry that conversation on? Yeah, sure. So www.polymerhq.io is the website, and my email address is yali@polymerhq.io. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Well, I've loved chatting with you today. And more than anything, not just about what we've talked about and the real issues that you're tackling for businesses, but also your origin story that began with that Commodore 64, and also hearing about your backstory as well as the Wall Street trader. Fantastic every step of the way. And I'd love to get you back on in the future, and we'll talk about some of the other areas we didn't get a chance to today. But more than anything, just thank you for sharing your story today. Thanks, Neil. This was great. Thanks so much for having me. Information security resilience is critical in this cloud-first infrastructure where the tech stack is no longer just as simple as being a clear set of boxes like it used to be for on-premises tech architecture. But instead, many businesses, or possibly the majority, now have a mishmash of SaaS and overlapping set of technology services, which complicates matters, especially when trying to protect every piece of company data. But I know this is a challenge experienced by every single business out there, so I'd love to hear more about how you are overcoming these challenges, what you've put in place, what has worked and what hasn't. And you can do all that by simply emailing me and sharing your story at techblogwriter@outlook.com. You can get me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok. Just look for @NeilC.Hughes and send me a message there too. Other than that, I'll return again tomorrow with another topic, but a big thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.